The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waking humanity, one soul at a time. This is The World You Don't Know radio show with your host, Nick O'Connell.
Now, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're very welcome along to this week's edition of The World You Don't Know with myself, Mick O'Connell, and I do have a guest on the line. I've got Brian McCarthy from the Irish Eviction TaskForce, and we're going to be talking about a very serious subject matter this evening. Now, Brian is going to be making an appearance at the upcoming Open Minds Conference in Dooley's Hotel in Waterford on the 2nd, 3rd and 4th of November next. Great event. There's some brilliant speakers in the lineup. I had Mark Devlin on there the other night, on Wednesday night, and I interviewed Mark Devlin, and he's going to be doing a 2-hour talk at the same event. But Brian is going to be doing a talk on evictions in Ireland and where we stand as a nation in relation to all of this. Good evening, Brian.
Good evening. How are you?
How are you, Brian? Brian, something the mainstream media are not talking about on a regular basis is evictions. What's going on in this country, Brian, and why have we slipped back into such an abysmal situation where Irish people are being evicted from their homes through no fault of their own?
Well, it's an agenda basically that's coming. The EU are putting a lot of pressure on now at the moment that Ireland isn't acting quickly enough with regard to evictions. But, you know, there is hope there with the stance that has been made over the last number of years that has slowed down the process, and they have been kind of backed into a corner in the courts now, and there's a lot of people watching, but it just isn't being reported in the mainstream media. I was just looking there earlier, like the figures, they're still massaging all the figures, but there's evictions going on every day of the week. And there's a huge number of them are classed as basically voluntary surrendering, which basically comes from the type of pressure that the banks and their teams put on people, even outside of the court orders, to try and force them to leave the home, even before they're getting the court order.
And what sort of pressure would they be putting these families under? What would be getting said to these families?
Last week there now alone, there's a girl with 3 kids, and sent someone around at 9:30 at night, knocking on her door, you know, a dark evening, and putting pressure on her then that she's going to be evicted, and that she's going to be made leave her home by security teams, and this girl hasn't even got an order yet.
Now, some people will say, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here, some people will say, well, it's their own fault, these people who are getting evicted. They're not paying their mortgages. What's their problem? What is the real situation?
1/3 of people can't pay, which is something that you never hear discussed. 1/3 of mortgages are in arrears. Social housing rental 1/3 in arrears, and rent 1/3 in arrears. Like, you have huge problems here with rent, as you know, you see in Dublin there, the cost of rent now, I think it's working out at €80 a day per person, so it's basically unsustainable, the rental side, and the rents are going up through the roof.
So can I ask you, Brian, are people being evicted? You know, when you hear about evictions in the courts around Ireland, and I mean, I'll give one court for example. I read there recently that one court in the Midlands, in Tullamore to be precise, there was something like 121 families up for evictions. Now my next question is, are a lot of these evictions with people who are falling behind in their rent because they can't afford the rent, or is it mostly mortgage evictions?
Mostly mortgage evictions. We just deal with family homes. We're fairly specific in that since we began at Anti-Eviction TaskForce. So we only deal with people who are dealing with banks and mortgages. That's it for us. And we're flat to the mat every day of the week, trying to deal with that. I presume the same things are going on with tenants, but it's a minefield, the whole tenant thing. So, as I said, we just try and stick with family homes, banks, mortgages, the courts, and then if they do get a possession order, we would then deal with the execution order side of it. And then, you know, if we do find out that there is going to be an eviction, we will take a stand. There's 4 stands kind of ongoing around the country for the last 2.5 years. So they've been relatively successful. The deceit in the paperwork, whether it's by the court or the bank, is just absolutely unbelievable.
Can you give me a typical scenario of one victim of these banks, these vulture funds who would be up for eviction? Give me one example. What would the process be for that person? Like they'd have a mortgage at one point in their life, and they're working and they're able to pay the mortgage. What happens then? What changes for them, and what's the process that leads to eviction?
Basically, if you go 90 days into arrears, the bank, according to their contracts, are entitled to send you a letter of demand. Now, they're harsh letters to get in the door for anyone. And basically, they'll give you a demand giving you 10 days or so, 7 or 10 days to pay up maybe 3, 4, 10,000 euros, whatever you're in arrears, or that they're going to go through legal process, which if you don't pay that up in full.
Now, when that letter is sent out to people, so I don't have a mortgage, Brian, I've never had a mortgage, and to be honest, I'm actually glad I don't, because I would hate to be in a position like that where you don't know whether you're going to be made bloody homeless or not, you know, and I feel absolutely sorry for anybody that who is caught up in that absolute nightmare scenario. But when the letter gets sent out to people and the demand, and listen, you're 10 grand in arrears, we want 10 grand up front now, or we're going to proceed with legal proceedings against you. If the person is still trying to pay off the mortgage, are the banks refusing to accept payments?
They are. Like, you need to come up with the arrears and be paying monthly. I had a lad there again Friday, and his bank rang me up. He works and he can't answer the phone at work, and they insist on calling between kind of 10 and 5. And he missed one payment last month, and he's caught up with his arrears and the whole lot, and they're ringing. He's 4 days late because they're on a 3-day week, just since early this month, and he is going to be able to pay it this Tuesday, but they were on the phone straight away.
Now, is this his first time falling into arrears with these people?
He fell into arrears a few years ago, but then he caught up and paid up his arrears.
But he just had a little slip again, and they're on top of him like a...
maybe
a rash.
Yeah, 3-day week, and their money is down, and he's trying to do an extra few hours to try and get the extra money so he can pay the bank. Like this dad was, when he was in trouble, he was still paying him 800 a month, and then he moved back up to 1,200, which included 200 towards the arrears. So he had completely and utterly come back into, you know, what they deem in the court as honour.
He's performing on the contract.
Yeah, and they're absolutely harassing him completely the minute that there's any kind of a blip. And like, I've been in a few of these vulture funds offices, and basically they're just they're young professionals sitting at a computer with a phone. And I brought one girl into vulture fund there recently, and she was horrified that these were the people, when we walked through the office, that were ringing her up and threatening her and making her life an absolute misery. And she was trying to come to a deal to settle with them in full. And that's going on 2.5 years or so, and they're still threatening her with execution orders, and she's trying to settle in full with them, and they just won't accept the payment.
Now, can I ask you, Brian, I've done many courses in my life, as I'm sure you've probably done a few yourself. When you get into adulthood, we tend to do a few little courses. But I also always notice that these types of courses and seminars, when you're going for these types of jobs, whether it'll be, you know, answering telephones and all that sort of stuff, there's a training session. There's a 2-day training session usually for all the employees, where they're telling you this is what we want you to say to the customers and stuff like that. Is that what's going on here with these vulture funds, that they actually have trained, like that they're training these young people, these young professionals, to get on the phone and threaten people?
They absolutely say the same thing, no matter which, whether you're dealing with mainstream bank or vulture fund. You're dealing with the same type of young professional who's absolutely rude, threatens you that if you don't pay up, that you're going to lose your home. They're even known to say things like that if you're evicted, that your kids will be taken after you and put into care. You know, and there is a lot of broken families there. There's a lot of people, you know, that are separated over all the different crises that this has brought forward in their life, and has brought them to breaking point, unfortunately. And then, you know, you're dealing with a a man or a woman who's trying to work hard every week, feed their kids and do their best to pay the bank, and they're still absolutely harassing the life out of them, like, and this is what's breaking people into breaking their energy and draining their energy. And like the amount of emotional pain and people that are serious risk of suicide, like that we're dealing with, the numbers are absolutely huge. 85% or so of those that we're dealing with serious emotional pain and depression, and no help there at any turn by the state. Like, we're even trying to get free legal aid for one man there now recently who's in a serious position with a threat of jail. There was an attempted eviction there a couple of years ago with balaclavas and things, and the trying to get free legal aid for him now has turned into an absolute nightmare as well. And you know, like, if you committed murder in the morning in this country, you could get free legal aid. Yes, you're in trouble with your mortgage and a bank and a court process that's extremely difficult, and no help there at all, if you like. I'm not the best for, you know, solicitors and barristers. They are dealing with those is they've no heart, no empathy. They're happy to lie, perjure themselves, and they can get away with it because you know, 100% of the cases are being won by the banks. So you know, there were not even one case around the country when we have pointed out huge fraud, overcharging, forged signatures, forged documents. And you still can't win a case when it is based on contract and courts of equity. Is just unbelievable. Like, you're in there on a summary summons, basically you're guilty and you've no defence, you're literally invisible to them. And they'll give you 3, 4, 5 goes in that court if you can't pay, 3 mostly if you just can't pay, and then you will get a possession order on your house. Like, and like the shock of that for people, you know, like we get people there even in their 60s and 70s, they're getting in letters who guaranteed loans for their kids, and they're getting in letters now threatening their house and stuff, like, and at that age after working all their life and now on the pension and getting a threat for your house to be taken off you. When you're reading the stories every day, you know, over 10,000 in emergency accommodation in Dublin, like, and these elderly people are absolutely, the life is frightened out of them to think that, you know, they're going to lose their home at this stage, like, and they're slow to talk to that generation, especially 60s and 70s. They're slow to talk to their family and their friends about being in financial distress, like,
and unfortunately they don't. I mean, I'm sure, Brian, with the kind of people you speak to both online and offline, with the forums that we communicate through with each other, like, we're well aware of Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 and, you know, the United Nations plan worldwide to strip everybody of private property, that all this ties in. But most older people, they wouldn't have a clue about any of that. And you're more likely they think they're out there on their own. They've got no one to turn to, do they? Or at least they don't think they do.
They don't think they do. Like, I was dealing with one elderly couple there last week, and like, they were absolutely devastated. And the letter was just a demand in from the bank, the very first stage of it. And that letter, absolutely, you know, they were just, they were pale as ghosts when I went into the house and stuff, and they were just bawling their eyes out. They couldn't even speak for the first 10 or 15 minutes. And
how are these letters worded, Brian? Do you have any examples of how they're worded?
Basically, it's just a short threat. Basically, that's saying we demand that you pay up whatever the amount in question is. I've seen them as low as, you know, kind of 1,500, 1,800 euros, like, and they're writing in threatening people to take their home for that. But demanding that payment in the 7 or 10 days, like, and if you haven't, you know, 20 euros for petrol in your car, like, and you can't turn to anyone else looking for money, like, where do you go? How do you answer that threat? Like, but we do answer that threat, and we try and, you know, negotiate at the first stage. Often the banks are gung-ho, regardless of whether they're the mainstream ones that were bailed out. You know, they're still 80% on the court lists every week, every day. So, like, even though they were bailed out, they're still the ones that are behind most of the evictions in the country at this stage, and they're holding on to thousands of houses that have been repossessed and that people have voluntarily left, and they're not being lived in at the moment. Like, you know, on the whole island of Ireland, we've 350,000 empty houses. So surely we come up with a solution. Like, if all those houses were in the market, them TDs wouldn't be getting the rent that they are for the houses that they're buying up, you know, on the cheap. And we've seen a lot of them buying them at all sorts of auctions and things like that. You see Michael D at the moment sent a representative to Galway in 2016 to spend 380,000 on a house for him. And you know, this is a man that's supposed to be up the top of the tree and should have the care of the country at heart.
Well, I was reading there today that the Office of Public Works installed a brand new set of gates on his own personal home in Galway.
Yeah, like
they said it was done for security reasons, but I mean, are we not all responsible for our own security in our own homes? You know,
Well,
it goes to show you, like, the amount of, I don't know, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours crap going on in this country.
Yeah, and you know, the 10,000 for the dogs, like, and we have dogs and I absolutely adore dogs, like, but to spend 10,000 on grooming your dogs in a year, and we had Bernese mountain dogs, like, that's an absolute just kick in the teeth for the whole of the Irish people who are struggling on the whole, like.
But you don't think all this is deliberate? Like, I've been watching the presidential campaign, and to be honest with you, I have absolutely zero opinion on that, or this blasphemy referendum. It's all ridiculous, to be honest with you. The whole lot of it's just a sideshow to distract people's attention away from what's really going on, i.e. what we're talking about here, the homeless crisis, the eviction crisis going on in this country.
Yeah, and there's absolutely no solutions to it, and there won't be. Like, there was a meeting in Portlaoise 2 years ago, and John McGuinness stood up there and he was saying, the Dáil will sort out this problem, like, and it was my turn to speak next, and I spoke from the heart, as I normally do when I'm doing, you know, anything. Go up in your mind will be the same, basically. I might use one or two photos or slides, but that'll be it. I'll speak from the heart. But when I tackled him then, you know, saying that the Crown or Oireachtas won't solve any of the problems, like, when I boxed him into a corner about NAMA, and that they weren't telling the public that it was 51% privately owned, he wasn't long sitting down, I can assure you, and they still haven't come clean about that. Like, same there with the permanent TSB proposed sale of mortgages to Lone Star. You'll see Start Mortgages as the name mentioned with it, but it is Lone Star, and Lone Star's only agenda is to asset strip in every country. Same as Goldman Sachs, you know, you'll know the same names that I do. Yeah. Ray Tabernia, you'll see there's all the different signs around Dublin. They're the ones now that have bought literally everything. You know, so there's huge problems coming down the road here, but I do have hope in this, that we had a very good meeting yesterday with different people from around the country who are fairly active, and you know, they're putting a plan in place now for people, and they're moving to contempt of court and attachment and committal jail proceedings. So they've started, we've kind of cut them out with a lot of the security and who they are, and wrote to the ex-detectives and ex-defence forces, terrorism part of it, and ex-Irish Navy lads who are involved behind these scenes and the evictions and organising them. And
I mean, I've seen a post here recently on Facebook. There was an eviction up here in Dublin. It was one of these protest groups who had taken occupancy of a house on North Frederick Street, I think it was, and they sent in the thugs with balaclavas on them, sledgehammers, chainsaws. And the talk at the time was, the rumour was that these were brought down from Northern Ireland, and not only that, that the minibus van that they'd used had, I think it came from Manchester or somewhere in the UK anyway, it was being used by the riot police.
Yeah.
I mean, what is going on if we've got people from the UK and you know, former UK registered vehicles coming to Dublin for evictions? I mean, this smacks of the black and tans, does it not?
Completely. Like, I witnessed an eviction in Fermoy last year, and when I got down there, which was 3 hours or so after the wife and 5 kids had come home from school, to see a military-style unit lined across the front of their house with dogs, batons, surveillance equipment of the highest order. Now, we were lucky enough to get a list of who was actually in the house, so we could do our research on them and who they were and stuff like. And there were ex-loyalist paramilitaries on the list, RIC constables, stationed out of Manchester as well, curiously enough. But I would have the stance of the lads at the door in Frederick Street. If you look at the video, like, we're looking at a lot of ex-army personnel and mercenaries dealing with the behind-the-scenes evictions, and they have a couple of companies there. Again, that we wrote to, that we know what they're at and what they're doing. But again, they're ex-members, as I said, Gardaí, Defence Forces, Navy, highly trained personnel. And when you look at the 2 lads standing on the door with their arms behind their back, that's a more military stance.
It was, it did look like a military stance, all right.
Yeah, you see Paul Keogh going into the Army Rangers wing in the Curragh, and you see them with their faces blacked out in the photo with the Minister for Defence. Like, what's going on there if the taxpayers are paying for that?
Yeah.
And the weapons that they have on view in that photo as well are absolutely horrific.
Well, it's to send a clear message, isn't it? Like, don't mess with us.
Yeah, but that's where the state has always gone. And, we're dealing with one fairly high-profile case there now, and they've absolutely blackguarded us with different summonses for different ridiculous things, and guards coming out knocking on the man's house that we're dealing with, putting them under fierce pressure the day before a court case there recently. Only we were there, and we knew that the warrant wasn't worth the paper it was written on, and I had the original order in the house, so I brought it out to show the guards, and I said, here, there's no warrant for that on that date. We're not entertaining this, and you're not speaking to the men. Like, and the same thing, the men hiding upstairs in absolute fear, because they were the same guards they sent round to the actual eviction 2.5 years ago. Like,
right.
Now, those guards, they know deep down what's going on. Like, your worst enemy wouldn't send you out to somewhere where you were put on video all over the country 2.5 years before it. And the inspector in that station sent them back to the same house again, where they know that, the first thing that our lads would be at, I don't do it myself because I do a bit of the talking to them, but the lads would have the phones out straight away, so they're going to try and restrict the phones.
Well, they are talking about that. I mean, the Minister for Justice, Charlie Flanagan, was saying that recently, that they're going to try and bring in a law to make it illegal to film the police. I mean, the whole idea of filming the police is checks and balances to make sure that they stay within the law.
Accountability. And, like, our lads there, you couldn't go anywhere without your phone, because they are being harassed in their cars, they are being harassed, if they're walking around their town at 9 or 10 o'clock at night. Same with girls. One girl had the driver's window of her car smashed in by a guard and pulled her out of the car and stuff. Outrageous intimidation, but that's where the state has always gone, and they're threatening that of the crew around the country now with jail and creative cases. Like, I have one very creative one myself there that's going on 2.5 years. And the same thing, like, I'm absolutely being railroaded, yet they won't produce any relevant paperwork, warrants, committed to prison overnight. The cover-ups are unbelievable. So if you can't rely then on your phone and actual evidence, when they're supposed to be, on their oath everywhere, but again, they're a private corporation now as well, and the guards themselves know that it's all about money. Become a sergeant, or you want to become a sergeant, or any level above that, you have to go off and do business courses now. So, it's absolutely just about a privately registered corporation on Dun and Brad Street. So it's a money-making racket, as you see there when there was the expose about the different accounts they have, and money was one of them was even called the laundering account. Like,
yeah.
So there's money going out.
And that story died a quick death in the media, didn't it?
The media are reporting nothing, like, and we speak to journalists all the time, and we've great girls in the group who are very well educated, employed, a huge level of the people that we are involved in our group, yet they'll always put out that unemployed and go in and get a job and, you know, say things like that when we are at court. And these are good people who take a day off work, you know, to go to court to support people that they know and that they've helped, and fantastic people, like, and it's the likes of them that give me great hope around the country that, you know, there will be a spark somewhere sooner or later. The farmers are getting a bit,
and something's going to have to give.
Yeah.
But Brian, listen, I want to go to a set of ads, so do you mind muting your microphone for about 2 minutes?
Yep.
That'll be brilliant. Folks, I'm going to go to a set of ads, and I shall be back in 2 minutes with Brian McCarthy. Talk to you very soon.
You're listening to Liffey Sound on 96.4 FM.
Now, folks, you're very welcome back. Brian, you're still there, you are? Hello?
Yeah.
Hi, you're still there. That's grand, Brian. Listen, Brian, this housing crisis, I was talking to a politician the other day. I'm not going to mention his name because it wouldn't be fair, because he's not here to defend himself or to confirm what we were speaking about. But we were talking about the homeless crisis, and I put a question to him. I said, you know, I look at politicians and I see 10,000 plus homeless living in sheltered accommodation in this country, in emergency accommodation. Now, it's either one of two things. It's either absolute incompetency on the part of the government, or it's policy. And he agreed with me, it's policy. And this is a guy who's a member of the Oireachtas. Yeah,
well, 30 number landlords, none of them have come into the course over the last 5 years or so. The very odd occasion one of them will pop in for a few minutes or whatever. But they have no interest, high up or low down. We've brought all the problems to them and the paperwork that we've lodged into the courts over the last 5 years or so. Same thing, they don't even want to know about the level of fraud, the different things that are wrong. We wrote into the PAC committee there when the permanent TSB went to Lone Star was there, and we wrote in the illegality of permanent TSB, setting that on. And the same thing, they handed it out, the letter, at the PAC committee meeting, so all the ones on the PAC committee then had it and should have read it. Yet they all denied that they knew anything about it in May then this year, and in the press denied it in the same month. So like they've absolutely no power high up or low down, and they know it. And you know, the ones then, they're just willing to play out a game then so they can collect their money every month. Easy street, gravy train, expenses that, you know, you wouldn't get from the mafia if you were working with them. Like,
I think we get a better deal off the mafia, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, they're just bound down. Like, the IFSC is a huge problem, and you know, they don't want to bring in things like financial transaction tax, because then we'd have a list of where all the money laundering is going on every single time they do a thing in any given day. So again, our government won't bring in anything like that, because it will expose, you know, the cartels. And there are very few cartels at the very top of the tree when you go and look at it and take a serious look at it. You know, the Central Bank of Ireland here, privately owned.
So who owns it? I mean, we hear these stories among conspiracy circles and stuff like that. You know, you hear that at conferences like the one that's going to be taking place next month in Dooley's Hotel that you're going to be speaking at, that, you know, we have this family, the Rothschilds, and they own all the banks and all. How true is all of that, Brian?
Well, when you look back and you go and research it and how they took control of the whole money supply, you know, there is stuff going on in America now where the Federal Reserve has been exposed for exactly the same thing. And, you know, the more that it comes out in the public domain, privately owned, you know, I was shocked the other day there was a bit of a debate in the House, and it was about that money wasn't printed in Ireland anymore. And I thought that, you know, we were still printing the euros in Dublin and stuff, and I looked it up then.
Well, I thought we had been printed in Sandyford.
Yeah, but apparently they've removed it now and there's no printing going on there anymore, and it's all done through Europe. So, like, we would have huge concerns. Again, the same people that own the banks and, you know, big top operators in the corporate world, they all have plain leasing firms and stuff. And you'd have to question then, like, if they're moving boxes of money around like that into Ireland and stuff, like, they have absolutely free reign in the world of criminality. You know, when we look behind the scenes at the vulture funds here, you'd have to look at where the money is coming from, and we have started asking questions now under anti-money laundering legislation as to where their money is coming from. So that might, if we can get a bit of traction on that, no, it is difficult to get traction because the media won't cover that. Even Charlie Weston, who he wrote a story there about his own house being taken over by a vulture fund. And I said, I'd emailed this fella, now he might do something about his own situation and story, when we highlighted that the money may have come from criminal activity that funded the vulture that bought his mortgage, and nothing, not one peep about it. Like I said, surely this fella know if he's crying in the paper about the vulture fund taking over his mortgage, and he'd
want to know a little bit about them,
that he'd do something about it. Like, and now he may have done something about it, but it wasn't allowed to be published. The same corporations are controlling absolutely everything. But there's good talk going on the ground, and there's a lot of stuff on social media there that wakes people up. You have a new level of people now that seem to be the Take Back the City. That's operating away. They've done some very good things lately. I do see that the politicians are trying to sneak in there now, and like they did with the water, and they will try and water that town. But I'd be hoping that they will stick to their guns, because it is important for people to see that there is others out there that are willing to help them and stuff. And if we could bring that whole scenario of family homes, and that we could protect community, is the only thing that stopped the evictions in the past. If you go back in history, Clare, the last time after the famine, 6,000 people stood outside a man's home, and they just couldn't get people to do the dirty work anymore, to be the court messengers for the landlords, etc. Who are now the banks.
And isn't that the problem in this country, that you've got all these morons, and I'm going to call them morons, who are carrying out these evictions, and the excuse they use is, I'm just doing my job, I'm just following orders. I mean, there's not one bit of consciousness anywhere in any of this.
There's absolutely none, but we had to deal with one horrific eviction there lately, and I spoke to the fellow who was there on behalf of the bank, and an absolute horror. You could not believe what he even said to the man and woman of the house while I was standing there, and absolutely no empathy, nothing. 3 young kids by himself, and no remorse with having put a family out earlier in the day and left all their stuff locked in with security into a house. No, it got resolved fairly quickly, because when their paperwork wasn't in order, then they actually left. So that case will be ongoing as well. So we'd have to see where it goes. But it's very hard going into court. Like we said earlier with the process, you're in there, summary summons, guilty. Then if you just can't pay after 3, 4 or 5 goes, you will get the possession order, whether it's off the county register or the judge. Then you'll get another threat that the execution order has come into the court, and that they've processed it, which is the plaintiff bank's request that the several sheriffs who don't exist, the court messengers who are supposed to be appointed by the Minister for Finance, which none of them are, that they're to go out, and that the decree, which you don't see anywhere in an order, yet the template says decree for the orders, they're sent out then, and that threat goes out that the sheriff will be out within the next 7 days or thereafter. And from that point then, as the statistics show, 90% are just leaving. They just can't take the emotional strain of it, and that there is people sleeping in cars, even with children. You see people there and sleeping in the police station in Dublin not so long ago. And you have the hidden homeless then, who are either back in with parents or friends for a few days, moving kids pillar to post to try and stay in the same area for schools.
I know plenty of people that are actually doing that. I do know people who are doing that. I'm just looking here. I have a web page up. Ireland's debt clock. It now currently stands, if this is true, at 209,728,419,000 and counting. Now, we bailed the banks out in 2008. I'm not sure what the exact figure was for bailing out these banks. Now, when you have a bank bailout, does that not automatically mean then that all mortgages should have been written down? You know, you're getting bailed out here. Cancel everything out and start again. Was that not the whole object of the exercise? Or what was the object of that exercise?
Yeah, it had to be in that scenario, but you know, that whole agreement with the banking bailout, there's still a lot to play for in that, and who actually got the money, because the banks are very good at they changed their names to Special Purpose Vehicle Bank. Bank of Ireland did it in 2004, AIB 2006, the two AIBs in 2008. So I would actually love to see the money that went to each bank and which entity it went to, because their sleight of hand and the use of words and companies and company numbers is just unbelievable deception. And I would be doing a thing as well, open your minds on their paperwork and stuff, and I'm going to show exactly the whole process and how flawed it is, and you know, I hope that will wake people up to some semblance of the deceit at that part of it. You know, the same thing, the contract initially, this money just worldwide can't be paid back, and like I've seen that debt clock, and you'd want sunglasses watching it, because the way it flashes and the way it spirals up.
Is that debt clock genuine, 209 billion?
I would think if the council debt and everything else was added into the debt in Ireland, that it would be closer to 400 billion. They basically removed all the council debt from the main spreadsheets just before we joined the EU, so that the balance sheet would look better, so we could join the EU. So again, more deceit even at the start when we supposedly legitimately joined the EU. But like, this is money that just cannot be repaid. Like,
I mean, how can it? I mean, the interest payments per year, according to this website, are 10.8 billion per year. So how can they pay that? I mean, the national debt per citizen, and that's just for me and for yourself, of course, Brian, is 43,930.
Yeah,
and I've nothing to show for that.
There's new children every day born in with that noose around their neck. That can never be repaid, like, and this debt is just spiraling out of control. You know, when they spoke about it first and the repayments over the year, when you look at what we've paid back already, and the time frame now has gone way out, and this is the same with the council debts. The council restructured all their stuff as well in the boom, or in the bust, and went to interest only, so them debts are spiraling out of control as well, and the taxpayer is the one funding everything then that is going on, and you see it every day, less and less services. You know, the hospitals in trouble, schools, justice system, every part of Ireland is a broken, archaic system that you have to rely on a TD to try and get anything done, when instead you should have a proper and fair system for everyone, and then we wouldn't actually need them at all if we had a proper and fair system. The civil servants are dictating what's going on for the, you know, a lot
but this
of them.
is the thing, you mentioned the word civil servants there. You know, I get this when politicians come knocking, especially at election time, and I'm sure they're going to be around this week. And I always say to them, so why are you even out looking for votes? You people don't have any powers. The civil servants have all the clout, because they're the ones that are there for life, these people, and they remain unknown and unseen.
Yeah, it's worth even going into a county council meeting. If you could encourage people just to go in once, just to see the circus that goes on in the county council meetings. You literally have all the county councillors, there's 33 of them here in Kerry. They're literally looking up then. One fella, the mayor, sits up on the top table with the CEO, and the CEO can only be of a corporation as well, so your county council is a corporation as well. So a money-making racket, and then the accountant, the legals, all of them are up at the top table with the mayor, who was being Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael in this term every time, every second year. And looking up to them to make the decisions. Like, so what's the point in the 33 of them being involved there if they've absolutely no clout? They're an absolute waste of money. And again, they're just bowing to the agenda that is coming from the very top down, through these, through the Minister for Environment and then through the CEO in the county. Like I'm not the best for all this building houses, because as I said already, there's hundreds of thousands of them empty around the country. That could be a huge solution and would drop the rental market way down. But if we're going to be dependent on the councillors and the TDs, we're absolutely in dire trouble. Like, and the only thing that you could hope is that some of them might start trying to save their souls instead of their seats, and that they may gain some level of consciousness. And even if one of them just came out and told the truth about what was going on, it would expose the whole lot. Like,
but so look what happened. I mean, no one's going to do it, Brian, because you see what happened to Garda Morris McCabe. I mean, we had the results of the tribunal there last week. It was blatantly obvious the state and the higher echelons on Garda Síochána were out to get the man for daring to speak the truth.
Yeah.
And he was a man of integrity from day one. I knew it. Every dog in the street knew he was a man of integrity, but they still went out and they tried to destroy that man's life for daring to speak the truth.
And there's people that were working in the Gardaí offices, and the stories were whispered through there, and they said to their friends and their family, like, oh, these stories are being whispered through the, and like mud sticks basically. And like, again, you have the whole weight of the system, the courts, the barristers, the commissioners, the chief superintendents, controlling every single thing that's going on. And like, all those that are working down underneath it, like the guards always say to us, I'm only doing my job and stuff. Like, if they were doing their job, they'd be around arresting these white collar criminals. You go into the fraud squad there, as we do regular, and they basically are literally in tears, and they're saying, oh, we're too busy looking up the tribunal stuff and doing this and that and the other thing, and they won't investigate any complaints that we're bringing to them about the banks. There was one there recently, and the man 9 times he had written to the bank to ask about overcharging, and it was the bones of 90,000 and 420,000. They were insisting that everything was correct and right, and he had the proof that it absolutely wasn't. They weren't even charging what was on the contract, and went to the fraud squad to see would they investigate the whole overcharging after a very rude letter came back from the bank saying they were finished and done with his complaint. And it was never a complaint, it was asking them what their methodology was, which is how they do their accounting, and absolutely no chance of them doing anything. Like, and that man is paying his mortgages in full. Yet when he did the forensic account, it was absolutely way overcharged. Like, so, like, people in the last few weeks there, like EBS in the PAC committee said that they'd identified all their customers who were in trouble with trackers. Yes, in the last 2 weeks there's people getting checks out for various amounts, 10, 20, 30,000, and not huge mortgages. Grand that comes in the door, but like, they're absolutely in breach of contract. And like, there's one lad now that rang me that he got a check in for 10 grand last week, like, and he was at 30 bear suicide a number of years back, when he couldn't put 100 and 200 quid together, and they put him under fierce pressure to come up with his arrears then when he got back working, and nearly broke his heart again, working around the clock to try and bring back the arrears, and he did. And then they sent out a check after all that level of threat that time, that they were in the wrong by overcharging him on his account the whole time. So what was...
And no apology from nobody?
No one. Just literally nothing even in the letter, only we deemed that we have overcharged you, and basically here's the check, and saying nothing. Like, but like, if they've done that with 10, 20, 30,000 people, and a lot of these when they're transferred, then the arrears were recapitalised, Irish Nationwide especially. The arrears were recapitalised, then it goes Anglo, IBRC, Noonan's Bank, and then on to different vultures, and like the vulture won't even entertain then that the account was overcharged before they bought it for pittance. Some of the mortgages they're getting them for nothing because people haven't paid for over 720 days. Like, why would you buy anything like that? It's just thrown in as a job lot. They're going to have to set everything, AIB, EBS, permanent TSB down the road. They're going to have to set every single thing because it's all done in fraud and deception, and the truth is starting to come about it. And like, all we can rely on after 7 years going through the courts, all we can rely on is the paperwork that we put in and that we've been deceived forever. Like, we're saying evictions are illegal since 1851.
Yeah.
Because they have no proper work or authority to go out and repossess any house. Yes, when you look through the stages of the whole thing, it starts with the bank. The courts then basically come in step 2 of it, to take possession of your house, and then step 3, the plaintiff bank orders the sheriff to go out and the security men, etc., and they take your house, and the bank becomes the beneficiary, or if it's insured, they become the beneficiary.
Now, insurance is something I want to talk to you about when I come back from the ads. I need to go to my last set of ads. So, Brian, would you mind hanging on for another couple of minutes?
Yep.
And that'd be brilliant. Folks, we'll be back in 2 minutes with Brian McCarthy. Talk to you very shortly.
You're listening to Liffey Sound, www.liffeysoundfm.ie. Listen online, community radio at its best.
Now, folks, you're very welcome back. Brian, you're still with me, yeah? Hello?
Hello.
There you are, Brian. Now, I've got about 10 minutes left, Brian. I just wanted to ask you about securitisation. You mentioned security there just before the break. Securitisation on a mortgage, Brian. Is it true that all mortgages are securitised by the banks when they're taken out, and therefore banks don't lose when you default?
No, and they're insured then against the default as well. It was probably the main reason that AIG was absolutely resurrected from the dead. Because they have to be really behind all the insurance that the banks are dealing with. The securitization, basically they're just odd instruments that are just traded on financial markets, like you'd see in Vegas and stuff, only they're using pieces of paper instead of chips. So, like, there's no transparency at all. Like, if you're in America, you can go in and see your deeds of transfer and assignment, so that if your mortgage was sold on from one of the mainstream banks to a vulture fund, which they will, as I said, already try and offload everything in the near future, you can go in and you can see on your computer screen what your loan was sold for, etc., etc. You can see the deeds of transfer and assignment. And in this country, you can't even get them if you went through discovery in the court process to get them. Like,
but if you take out a mortgage with a bank, right? Now, I could be wrong. I don't know, but tell me if I am wrong. When you take out a mortgage with a bank, that's a contract. So you half own that contract along with the bank. It's your instrument. Do the banks have the right to sell that onto a vulture fund without your permission?
Your solicitor didn't give you any legal advice, so when you go through all the contracts, you will see hidden clauses. Now, a contract is supposed to be open, transparent, and you're supposed to be able to understand it. Yet, when I pointed this out to solicitors about your power of attorney being signed away in your contract, 2 or 3 of them were horrified because they hadn't even read their own mortgage contracts, and that they signed away their power of attorney. They just couldn't believe it. Like, so you didn't get good advice, and this was inside there basically to enslave you. They knew what was coming down the road, which was why they loaded out the money there between 2004 and especially in 2006-07 and part of 8, and they knew that this crash was coming. They knew 5 years before it was coming, and they gave out all this money. People went in for to try and get a mortgage, and they came out with mortgage and a car. You can buy a bigger house than that. There was 2 people down in Waterford who were on the dole, got 280,000. No repayment capacity, as you'd see in an awful lot of cases, and the money just can't be paid back. Yet the banks are quids in, as you'll see. Their balance sheets are way back up, and the profits they're making, and now they're basically tax free then on top of it. And the same with these vulture funds registered as charities. tax-free status, protecting all their own, and the wheel is still turning, but the energy of the people are the ones that are paying all the debt and getting no services or quality of life, for what they're doing. And we're a nation that's really struggling. An island that could be self-sufficient completely and utterly, and there's just no common sense, and we'll never see it as long as we have a government that's just willing to be controlled and no one to speak up the truth about it. And you can go back through all the generations of politicians. 10 of the last 13 were barristers that were the Taoiseachs. So they knew the contracts that they were signed into that sold Ireland out over the last 100 years. And morally, how do you do something like that to your own people? They've absolutely no heart. They're people of no empathy. So they just care about themselves, and that's it. It doesn't go any further than that.
It seems so deliberate, though, doesn't it? How can a nation become so uncaring to itself? And how can we allow these so-called leaders rule over us the way they do? I mean, Christy Murphy, he put it right when he said we were a nation of obedient shit takers.
Yeah, but he hasn't done much else other than say that. And we had a few more high-profile ones came in there a couple of years ago as well, musicians. And I met a few of them actually just up in Dublin at one event, some of those musicians, and I showed them, some of the videos and the different things that were going on around the country and explained different cases. And same thing, they promised that they'd highlight it, and absolutely nothing. Now, grand if, they say something to the media and the media won't print it, but those people should be coming out there and making little short videos about what's going on around the country, if they do really care about what's going on.
Now, I did see one video with, it was a couple of years ago now, Christy from Aslan, whom I know myself, but he put a great video where he was talking about the dangers of fluoride in the war. So, it's one celebrity speaking out about something that is close to a lot of people's hearts.
Yeah, but they all see, I struggle every time I go to Dublin now when I see the amount of homeless there, and especially if you're up there in the evening, 9-10 o'clock, as you're walking back to head home and stuff, the amount of doorways and young people and elderly people, I just don't understand how people can live up there and just walk past that and just think that it's a normal thing, and these politicians, a few have died up around the Kildare Street area, unbelievable that they haven't done anything other than help the banks, even through legislation that they make this legislation, even the Land Conveyancing 2013 goes through the door, we struggled with legalese 7 years ago to understand it, and you'd have to have the pencil and the ruler out, and a lot of these don't have the education that our lads have, and they have no understanding of this legalese, and they're just told, here, sign that, and
they just sign it, yeah.
They get the majority, and the independents then can play the cute game, and Sinn Féin, people before profit, they can just sit back as if they're in the opposition. Oh yeah, we'll vote no to that, and we'll look great for the people, and we'll get an extra few votes next time, but do nothing about it in the meantime. It's outrageous that there's no, people are just drained. They're absolutely drained, and they just don't have the energy to fight back against this.
Do you see anything? One of the worst stories that I've heard throughout this crisis was, and I can't remember who it was said it to me, but I recall someone telling me once that, in his opinion, a lot of these accidents that you see on country roads, on straight country roads, where you'll see a single guy in a car, crash into a barrier or something like that at 2 o'clock in the morning. He says, ask yourself a question, has that guy got a mortgage, and is he in a raise, and does he have a young family, and did he only see one way out, i.e., a crash like that rather than suicide, because suicide wouldn't pay out on insurance, whereas a tragic accident would. Now, I said, that's a bit extreme. He says, well, I think it's going on. What do you think of that?
Well, yeah, I've done the courses on suicide because I needed to do them to help me with what we were dealing with on the phones every day. these people can't get help anywhere, and they're huge level of emotional pain. But like when you're doing them courses, like up to 25% aren't even recorded. They're just saying accidents. Yet they're saying the statistics from the people doing the courses say that there's another quarter left off it. That there's a question mark over, like, so.
Because I wonder if you did look into these, these poor victims' backgrounds. I'd say there could be some financial pressures on them, and that's the reason they made it, had an accident, so to speak, but it was probably really suicide. Brian, listen, I've got about a minute left. You're going to be appearing at the Open Minds conference. Do you want to talk a little bit about your slot at that conference and when it's on?
Yeah, Friday, 2nd, 3rd and 4th of November. I'm actually really looking forward to it, because I went there the last time and I had a fantastic time there, fantastic speakers that I'm looking forward to seeing again this time. I will be speaking about evictions, and I will be showing the process and the deceit that they do, and I did a little trial of it yesterday at the meeting that we had between ourselves, just to show them the deceit through the orders, the execution order, and the eviction process. And these are lads who've been dealing with it for years, and they couldn't believe the sleight of hand in the paperwork and how they do it. So I will talk about that, and I will be talking about a few of the names that I said earlier. I will be talking about them openly at Open Your Minds.
Yeah.
Who are those up the top of the tree that are sitting behind the evictions? And they know that I know because we wrote to them. So, the more people that know who's behind this and what the agenda is, long term the better for everyone. Like, this is a war on the children of Ireland. And that's the way we have to look at it. Like, in any crowd that are willing to wage war on children of any nation, they don't deserve any positions of power, and we basically need to start from scratch. And hopefully that will, come someday, and someday soon.
Hopefully.
I'd love to see the banks crash again.
Who wouldn't, Brian? Who wouldn't? And just take all that wealth away from them and distribute it amongst the people where it belongs.
Yeah, just start from scratch.
That's
basically it. And there's no one else. Imaginary lines, borders, all created by legalese, rubbish in the media, distraction away from what's real. And what's real is that there's people dying every day of the week from all the different crises that we have here in Ireland. Eviction is a huge problem.
It's a massive problem, and it's an unsung problem. The mainstream media are not singing it from the rooftops when they should be. It's a national crisis at this stage, and that's not just the homeless crisis. I mean, the amount of evictions is it's ridiculous. It's off the scale, and it shouldn't be happening. Brian, we have to leave it there, unfortunately. I do look forward to seeing you down in Waterford. Hopefully I will make it down, barring nothing stops me going down, but hopefully I will be there. And you'll be there on what day, Brian?
I'm there on the Friday afternoon.
On the Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
Well, that's brilliant. Well, listen, Brian, thanks very much for coming on to the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Cheers. Thanks very much. Thank you, Brian. I'll talk to you again very soon. Thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that was Brian McCarthy, who's going to be appearing at the Open Minds conference in Waterford on Friday the 2nd of November next. He'll be on in the afternoon in Dooley's Hotel in Waterford, so go along there, and he'll be doing a very, very good talk on evictions and the process, on the fraud that's going on with vulture funds, etc, etc, etc. It's going to be a fantastic talk. That's the Open Minds conference, organised by the Awaken Awareness South East Ireland Facebook page. They're a great bunch of people. They put on an event there last year, and they're doing it again this year, and I wish them every single success. Trevor Evers and all his team down there, Danny Malloy and everybody else. You all know who you are. Anyway, folks, this has been The World You Don't Know, and remember, the world is full of wonderful people. If you can't find one, be one. Talk to you all again soon.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Breaking humanity, one soul at a time. This is The World You Don't Know radio show with your host, Nick O'Connell.